Fluffy the Destroyer and the Boy. Let me tell you about Keithver, the most feared apex predator in 17 different star systems. This guy had claws that could slice through titanium, fangs that dripped with paralyzing venom, and a kill count so impressive that most species just surrendered when they heard his name whispered in the cosmic wind. He stood 9 feet tall, covered in midnight black scales that shifted color like oil slicks, and had eyes that glowed red enough to make demons feel self-conscious about their life choices. Keithver had spent the last 3 centuries perfecting the art of terror. He didn't just hunt for food or territory like those amateur predators. No, he hunted for the pure artistic satisfaction of watching civilizations crumble at the mere mention of his approach. It was a calling, really, a vocation that he took very seriously, which is why when he boarded the luxury cruise ship Celestial Dream, he expected his usual reception: screaming, panic, maybe some fainting, and definitely some begging for mercy that he would ignore with professional indifference. The ship was packed with tourists from dozens of species, all blissfully unaware that their relaxing vacation was about to become a very short horror movie with an extremely predictable ending. Keithver had already worked his way through the upper decks, leaving a trail of disenchanted passengers cowering in their luxury suites. The Zentrans had offered him their entire life savings. The Voxlands had tried to negotiate with interpretive dance. The crystalline entities had literally shattered themselves rather than face him directly. All very satisfying and exactly according to plan. He was prowling through the family recreation deck, savoring the delicious scent of fear that seemed to permeate the recycled air, when he encountered them. A small human female, maybe 20 years old, with brown hair tied back in what humans call a ponytail, crouched protectively in front of an even smaller human. The tiny one couldn't have been more than 8 of their years, with bright blue eyes and blonde hair that stuck up in every direction like he'd been struck by lightning. Perfect. Keithver allowed himself a moment of anticipation. Human cubs were supposed to be particularly satisfying to terrorize. According to his research, something about their primitive fear responses and high-pitched vocalizations. He'd been looking forward to this part. The older human, who was clearly some sort of guardian or caretaker, spotted him first. Her face went through the usual progression of emotions: confusion, recognition, then absolute terror as her primitive brain finally processed what she was looking at. She threw her arms wide, positioning herself between Keithver and the smaller human. "Stay back," she shouted, her voice cracking with fear. "Don't you dare hurt him." Yes. The protective instinct. Keithver had seen it before. It always made the terror more poignant when they realized how utterly useless their heroic gestures were. He took a step forward, letting his claws extend with that satisfying metallic sound that usually made his victims lose control of their bodily functions. The small human peeked around his guardian's legs, looked directly at Keithver's face, and said the last thing anyone in the galaxy would have expected. "Wow. Are you a really big kitty?" Keithver stopped mid-prowl, his claws retracting slightly out of sheer confusion. In 300 years of professional terrorizing, no one had ever asked him if he was a kitty. A demon, yes. A nightmare made manifest, certainly. The physical embodiment of death itself on several memorable occasions. But a kitty? The small human pushed past his guardian despite her frantic attempts to hold him back, and walked right up to Keithver with the kind of fearless curiosity that would have impressed him if it hadn't been so absolutely baffling. "I'm Tommy," the child announced, tilting his head back to look up at Keithver's towering form. "Do you want to be friends? I like your pretty scales. They're all shiny and stuff." Keithver's mouth opened, but no sound came out. His brain, which had been finely tuned for 3 centuries of efficient killing, seemed to have encountered some sort of system error. This was not how apex predator encounters were supposed to go. There were rules, protocols, a natural order that had worked perfectly well since the dawn of time. "Tommy, get back here right now," the guardian hissed, reaching for the child. But Tommy was already extending one tiny hand toward Keithver's scaled leg, as if he wanted to pet him. And for the first time in his long and illustrious career as the galaxy's most feared predator, Keithver had absolutely no idea what to do next. The aftermath, what happened next, would haunt Kiefer for the rest of his unnaturally long life. The small human, this Tommy creature, actually made contact. His tiny hand patted Kiefer's leg with the same casual affection you might show to a domesticated animal. The touch sent an entirely unfamiliar sensation through Kiefer's nervous system. Not pain, not pleasure, just complete and utter bewilderment. "You're so soft," Tommy shouted, which was objectively incorrect, since Kiefer's scales were harder than battle armor. But the child seemed truly delighted. "What's your name, kitty?" "I'm Kiefer the Destroyer," he managed to growl, trying to inject some menace back into the situation. "Bane of civilizations, harvester of screams, the shadow that devours light itself." Tommy's face scrunched up in concentration, processing this information with the seriousness of a scholar contemplating ancient texts. After a moment, he nodded decisively. "That's too long. I'm going to call you Fluffy." If Kiefer had been capable of having a stroke, this would have been the moment. Fluffy. 3 centuries of carefully cultivated terror, and he was now Fluffy. "My name is not Fluffy," he said, his voice dropping to what he hoped was a bone-chilling whisper. "I have consumed the hearts of 1,000 warriors." "Fluffy is a good name," Tommy insisted, completely unmoved by the heart-consuming revelation. "Do you want to play fetch? I have a ball in my backpack." The Guardian, who had been watching this exchange with the expression of someone watching reality crumble in real time, finally found her voice. "Tommy, honey, that's not a kitty. That's a very dangerous creature who wants to hurt us." "No, he doesn't," Tommy said, with the absolute certainty that only children possess about completely wrong things. "He's friendly. Look at his tail." Kiefer glanced back at his tail, which he was mortified to discover was indeed swishing slightly. When had that started happening? He forced it to stop immediately, but the damage was done. "See?" Tommy pointed triumphantly. "He's happy. Can we keep him, Jenny? Please." So, the Guardian was Jenny. Kiefer filed this information away while simultaneously questioning why he was bothering to learn their names. He was supposed to be terrorizing them, not taking notes for future social interactions. "We cannot keep the nightmare monster, Tommy," Jenny said, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. "And even if we could, your parents would kill me." "He'll be like a pet," Tommy said reasonably. "We have a goldfish named Mr. Bubbles. Fluffy could be friends with Mr. Bubbles." Kiefer tried to imagine explaining to his fellow apex predators that he'd been demoted to goldfish companion. The shame would follow him across star systems. "Listen, small human," he began, crouching down to bring his glowing red eyes level with Tommy's face. Up close, he could see every detail of the child's expression, the complete absence of fear, the genuine curiosity. It was deeply unsettling. "I am not a pet. I am a predator. I hunt. I kill. I feast on the terror of lesser beings." Tommy listened to this entire speech with rapt attention, nodding along like Kiefer was explaining the rules of a particularly interesting game. "Do you need a litter box?" Tommy asked when Kiefer finished. That was it. Kiefer's carefully maintained composure finally cracked. He threw back his head and released a roar that shook the entire deck, a sound that had once caused an entire moon to surrender unconditionally. The lights flickered, the walls vibrated, and Jenny grabbed onto a nearby railing to keep from falling over. Tommy clapped his hands in delight. "Again? Again!" he cheered, bouncing on his toes. "That was awesome. You're like a really cool dinosaur." Kiefer stared at the child, his roar dying in his throat. In the distance, he could hear other passengers screaming and running, which was the normal and proper response to that sound. But this small human was asking for an encore, like he just witnessed the galaxy's best entertainment. "You're supposed to be afraid," Kiefer said weakly. "Why?" Tommy asked, tilting his head with genuine confusion. "You haven't hurt anybody. You're just big and loud. My Uncle Rick is big and loud too, but he gives the best hugs." Kiefer sat down heavily on the deck, his legs suddenly feeling unreliable. 300 years of apex predator instincts, and he was defeated by a creature that weighed less than his left claw. "This is not how this works," he argued, more to himself than to them. "What works?" Tommy asked, climbing up onto Kiefer's knee like it was a piece of playground equipment. Are we playing a game? I like games. And that's when Kiefer realized that somehow, inexplicably, they were. The final chapter word travels fast on a cruise ship, especially when that word involves the galaxy's most feared apex predator apparently being tamed by a human child. Within minutes, a small crowd had gathered at what they considered a safe distance to witness this unprecedented event. Kiefer could hear their whispered conversations, and every word was like a dagger to his professional reputation. Is that really Kiefer the Destroyer? The one from the horror stories? He looks so docile. I heard humans have some kind of psychic domination ability. No. I read they secrete pheromones that pacify aggressive species. My cousin's neighbors said they're actually an ancient warrior race that pretends to be weak. Kiefer wanted to correct these ridiculous theories, but Tommy had discovered that his scales made interesting clicking sounds when tapped with a small toy spaceship. And the child was currently composing what he called a space song on Kiefer's arm. Every time Kiefer tried to move, Tommy would look up with those impossibly blue eyes and say, "Don't move, Fluffy. I'm not done with the music yet." And somehow, impossibly, Kiefer found himself staying still. Captain Rodriguez appeared at the edge of the crowd, a middle-aged human with graying hair and the expression of someone whose vacation cruise had just become significantly more complicated than his insurance policy covered. He approached cautiously, hands raised in what Kiefer assumed was meant to be a peaceful gesture. Excuse me," Captain Rodriguez said, addressing the general area between Kiefer and Jenny. "I'm Captain Rodriguez. Would it be possible to discuss the current situation?" "There's no situation," Tommy announced before anyone else could speak. "Fluffy's my friend now. We're going to play Space Pirates later," he promised. Kiefer tried to remember when he'd made any such promise, and came up blank. Apparently, his reputation for keeping his word was now working against him in ways he'd never anticipated. "Right," Captain Rodriguez said slowly. "And Fluffy here isn't planning to, consume any passengers, or harvest their screams or anything like that." "Fluffy doesn't eat people," Tommy said, with the confidence of someone who'd known Kiefer for all of 20 minutes. "He's a vegetarian. Look how pretty his teeth are." This was factually incorrect on multiple levels. But before Kiefer could protest, Tommy had somehow convinced him to open his mouth so everyone could admire his fangs. The crowd murmured appreciatively, as if they were viewing an art exhibit rather than weapons designed for efficient killing. "Those are some very nice teeth," Jenny said weakly, clearly trying to play along while figuring out how to extract them from this increasingly surreal situation. "I know, right?" Tommy beamed. "And he's really smart too. Watch this. Fluffy, can you say your name?" "I am Kiefer," he rumbled, then immediately felt ridiculous for performing tricks. "Good boy." Tommy reached into his backpack and pulled out a juice box and a small package of goldfish crackers. "Here, you must be hungry after all that roaring." Now, Kiefer had consumed the flesh of creatures that existed in dimensions humans couldn't even perceive. He had dined on the crystallized screams of dying stars and found them moderately satisfying. He had never in his entire existence consumed artificial orange-flavored liquid or small orange crackers shaped like aquatic creatures. But Tommy was holding them out with such genuine kindness, such innocent generosity, that seemed somehow more monstrous than anything Kiefer had ever done in his long career of actual monstrosity. He accepted the juice box, which looked comically small in his massive claws, and managed to figure out the straw mechanism, while Tommy cheered his success. The liquid was sickeningly sweet, and tasted nothing like any fruit that had ever existed in nature. The crackers were somehow even worse. But Tommy watched him eat them with such pride that Kiefer found himself nodding and making what he hoped were appreciative sounds. "See?" Tommy told the crowd. "He likes people, food. He's probably been hungry for a really long time, because nobody was nice enough to share." The artificial flavoring and sugar hit Kiefer's system like a chemical weapon. His species had evolved to process organic matter and pure energy, not whatever laboratory experiment humans called food. His vision began to get slightly fuzzy around the edges, and he felt an unfamiliar lightness in his head. "Are you okay, Fluffy?" Tommy asked, patting Keithver's arm with concern. "You look funny." Keithver tried to respond, but the words came out slightly slurred. "I think your sustenance may be mildly toxic to my physiology." "He's getting loopy," Jenny observed, though she seemed more relieved than concerned. "Maybe we should get him some water." "I'll get the good water," Tommy announced, digging through his backpack again. The kind with the bubbles. As Tommy rummaged around, chattering about different types of water and asking if Keithver preferred his drinks cold or room temperature, the apex predator experienced something entirely new. The child's casual care, his assumption that Keithver's preferences mattered, his complete lack of fear or expectation of violence. It was all so alien that Keithver's hunting instincts seemed to be short-circuiting. For the first time in 3 centuries, instead of wondering how to most efficiently kill the creatures around him, Keithver found himself wondering if Tommy had eaten enough today, and whether the child was warm enough in the ship's recycled air. It was deeply disturbing, and he was absolutely not going to think about why. The final chapter. The sugar crash hit Keithver about 10 minutes later, leaving him feeling simultaneously hyper-aware and oddly relaxed, which was not a combination his nervous system was designed to handle. Tommy had curled up against his side, using Keithver's tail as a pillow, while showing him pictures on a small device that apparently contained the entire history of something called cute animal videos. "Look, Fluffy. This one's a baby elephant. And this one's a puppy. Oh. And this one's a kitten that looks just like you." The kitten in question was orange, had 4 legs, and was approximately 1/100th of Keithver's size. The resemblance was non-existent, but Tommy seemed truly convinced they could be twins. Keithver was beginning to suspect that human pattern recognition might be fundamentally broken. That's when his emergency communicator chimed with an incoming priority message from the Apex Predator Council. Keithver's blood, which had been running unusually warm thanks to the sugar rush, immediately turned to ice. The only time the council contacted field operatives was for 2 reasons: mission updates or disciplinary action. Given that his current mission status could generously be described as catastrophically compromised, he had a sinking feeling about which category this fell into. "I need to take this," he told Tommy, gently moving the child to a more comfortable position against a nearby cushion. "Is it your boss?" Tommy asked with the intuitive understanding that children sometimes display about adult problems. "Are you in trouble?" The accuracy of this guess was unsettling. "Something like that." Keithver activated his communicator's privacy field and stepped away from the crowd. The holographic image that materialized was Elder Vashtor, a creature so ancient and terrifying that even other apex predators spoke of him in whispers. His scales had long since turned silver with age, and his eyes held the kind of wisdom that came from personally ending several civilizations. "Keithver," Elder Vashtor's voice carried the weight of cosmic disappointment. "Explain to me why the galactic news networks are reporting that you've been domesticated by a human child." "That's not exactly accurate," Keithver began, then realized he had no idea how to complete that sentence. "The situation is more complex than it appears." "Is it?" Elder Vashtor's image flickered as he manipulated something off-screen. "Because the footage I'm looking at shows you allowing a small human to pet you while you consume what appears to be recreational snack food. The commentary refers to you as adorable." Keithver's shame was so profound, it was probably visible from space. "Elder, I can explain." "Oh, I'm sure you can. But first, let me share something with you." Elder Vashtor's expression shifted to something that might have been sympathetic if it wasn't so deeply exhausted. "You are not the first." The privacy field suddenly expanded and additional holographic figures materialized around them. Keithver recognized some of the most feared predators in the galaxy, all looking like they'd rather be anywhere else in the universe. "Meet your support group," Elder Vashtor announced with grim satisfaction. The first figure was Razak, the soul renderer, whose very presence usually caused psychic entities to flee to other dimensions. He looked like he'd been crying, which should have been impossible since his species didn't have tear ducts. It was a human female, maybe 12 of their years. Razak said without preamble, his voice hollow with remembered trauma. She called me Erzai and braided flowers into my tentacles. I let her do it, Keithfer. I actually let her do it. Oh, that's nothing, interjected Thexer, the world ender, whose planet-cracking abilities had made him a legend among destruction specialists. A human male, maybe 6 years old, decided I was his imaginary friend. Except I wasn't imagined. I was standing right there. And somehow everyone just went along with it. I spent 3 days playing Tea Party. Tea Party? Keithfer asked weakly. Don't ask about the tiny plastic cups. Thexer shuddered. Just don't. A third figure materialized, and Keithfer nearly fell over. It was Morgath, the Dream Devourer, a creature so terrifying that most species had evolved natural mental blocks just to prevent nightmares about him. He was wearing what appeared to be a small hat with flowers on it. Human child, Morgath said simply. Age 7. She said I looked sad and needed cheering up. I have consumed the nightmares of entire star systems, Keithfer. I don't get sad. But somehow she convinced me to wear this. He gestured at the hat with one massive claw. I haven't been able to take it off. Every time I try, I remember how happy she looked when she put it on me. This is impossible, Keithfer protested. We are apex predators. We are evolution's perfect killing machines. We don't get domesticated by creatures that should rightfully be our prey. Elder Vashtar's laugh was bitter and ancient. You would think so, wouldn't you? But we've been studying this phenomenon for decades now. Humans, it appears, have developed the most insidious survival strategy in galactic history. They don't fight us. They don't run from us. They don't even acknowledge that we're a threat. They simply treat us like we're already part of their social group and assume we'll behave accordingly. But that's ridiculous, Keithfer said. It shouldn't work. And yet here we are. Elder Vashtar gestured to the assembled group of compromised predators. The humans call it domestication, but our xenobiologists have a different term for it. They call it aggressive socialization. Humans apparently evolved in an environment so dangerous that their survival strategy became making friends with everything that didn't immediately try to kill them. And since we're intelligent enough to recognize their non-threatening behavior, we get caught in the same behavioral loop as their actual domestic creatures. Razak nodded miserably. The worst part is, it feels good. The little human's approval, her trust, her happiness. When you respond positively to her attention, it triggers neurochemical responses we didn't even know we had. There's something else, Thexer added reluctantly. Once you've been exposed to extended human affection, normal predatory behavior starts to feel hollow, empty, like you're missing something important. Keithfer thought about Tommy's excited clapping when he'd roared, the child's genuine concern when he'd felt dizzy from the sugar, the way Tommy had automatically assumed that Keithfer would want to be comfortable and well-fed. The memory made something in his chest feel warm and tight. Oh no, he said quietly. Oh yes, Elder Vashtar confirmed. Welcome to the club, Keithfer. You've been adopted. The holographic support group faded away, leaving Keithfer alone with the devastating realization that he'd been evolutionarily outmaneuvered by a species that considered goldfish crackers an acceptable form of sustenance. He stood there for a moment, processing the fact that his 300-year career as the galaxy's most feared predator had been ended by a child who thought he needed a litter box. When he returned to Tommy and Jenny, he found that the situation had somehow become even more surreal. Tommy had convinced Captain Rodriguez to provide them with blankets and pillows, creating what humans apparently called a fort out of furniture and fabric. The child was now inside this makeshift structure, patting the ground beside him to signal a pause. Come on, Fluffy. I made us a hideout. We can watch movies in here. Keithfer looked at the small space, calculated the mathematical impossibility of his 9FT frame fitting inside, and then found himself carefully crawling in anyway. The ceiling was maybe 3 feet high, forcing him to curl up in what was probably the least dignified position he'd ever assumed. Tommy immediately snuggled against his side like Keithfer was a living heating pad. See? Cozy, Tommy declared, pulling out his portable entertainment device. What kind of movies do you like, Fluffy? I have cartoons and space adventures and animal documentaries. I have never watched movies, Kiefer admitted, which seemed to horrify Tommy more than his earlier claims about consuming hearts and harvesting screams. Never, but movies are the best. Okay, we're going to start with something easy. This one's about a fish who gets lost and his dad has to find him. For the next 2 hours, Kiefer found himself experiencing human entertainment media for the first time. The story was simple enough, involving a small orange fish separated from his parent and the various creatures who helped reunite them. But what struck Kiefer wasn't the plot. It was Tommy's reactions. The child gasped at the scary parts, cheered when the hero succeeded, and wiped his eyes during the emotional moments. "Are you crying?" Kiefer asked when he noticed Tommy sniffling during a particularly touching scene. "It's just really sad when they can't find each other," Tommy explained, not at all embarrassed by his emotional response. "Don't you think it's sad?" Kiefer considered this. In his experience, separation meant death, and death was usually simply a fact of existence. But watching the animated fish search desperately for his offspring, seeing the parents' determination and fear, something in Kiefer's chest felt tight and uncomfortable. "Perhaps," he admitted quietly. "I knew you had feelings," Tommy said with satisfaction, then promptly fell asleep with his head on Kiefer's arm. And that's when everything changed. Kiefer had never experienced protective instincts before. His species didn't raise their young communally, didn't form emotional bonds, didn't feel responsible for the welfare of other creatures. But as Tommy slept, breathing softly in the warm cocoon of their makeshift fort, Kiefer felt something fundamental shift in his neural pathways. The child was small, vulnerable, trusting. He placed himself completely at the mercy of a creature that could kill him without effort. And he'd done it because he believed Kiefer was good. Not powerful, not feared, not legendary good. It was terrifying in ways that no opponent had ever been terrifying. That's when the emergency klaxons started blaring. Kiefer was instantly alert. His predator instincts analyzed the sound patterns and ship vibrations. This wasn't a drill or a minor malfunction. This was an attack. His enhanced hearing picked up the distinctive whine of energy weapons charging, the heavy footsteps of armed boarders, the sharp scent of fear spreading through the ship's ventilation system. Space pirates, a raiding party from the sounds of it, probably after the wealthy passengers and their valuables. Tommy stirred at the noise, blinking sleepily. "What's that sound, Fluffy?" "Danger," Kiefer said simply, his mind already calculating threat assessments and escape routes. His first instinct was to abandon the humans and either join the pirates or simply leave the ship entirely. It was the logical choice, the smart choice, the choice that aligned with 300 years of predatory behavior. Instead, he found himself moving to shield Tommy with his body. "Stay behind me," he said, his voice carrying an authority that made Jenny scramble to comply. Despite her obvious terror, the pirates burst onto the recreation deck moments later, a mixed crew of various species, all armed with military-grade plasma weapons. Their leader was a Corfax battle-scarred veteran with cybernetic implants and the kind of attitude that came from years of successful raids. "Everyone on the ground," the leader shouted, firing a warning shot that scorched the ceiling. "This is a robbery, a massacre, so don't make it complicated." The passengers who had been watching Kiefer's earlier domestication immediately complied, dropping to their knees with practiced efficiency. These were seasoned travelers who knew the drill. Give the pirates what they wanted and everyone would probably survive. But Tommy didn't understand the social contract of space piracy. He peeked around Kiefer's protective bulk and pointed at the lead pirate. "Are you the bad guys?" he asked, with genuine curiosity. The Corfax leader's scarred face twisted into what might have been amusement. "That's right, little human. We're the bad guys, and you're going to be very quiet while we take everything valuable on this ship." "That's not very nice," Tommy said disapprovingly. "You should say, please, when you want something." Several pirates laughed at this, but their leader was scanning the deck with professional interest. His enhanced eyes swept past the cowering passengers, cataloged the valuable jewelry and electronics, and then stopped when they reached Kiefer. Recognition dawned slowly across the pirate's features. Well, Kiefer, the destroyer. I heard rumors you'd gone soft, but I didn't believe them." His grin revealed sharpened metal teeth. "This is perfect. The most feared predator in the galaxy, brought low by a human child. The boys back at the station are never going to believe this." "You know, Fluffy?" Tommy asked, apparently delighted by this connection. "Fluffy?" The pirate leader's laughter was harsh and mocking. "Oh, this is rich." The great Keithfer reduced to a pet name. He raised his weapon, pointing it directly at Tommy. "Tell you what, Fluffy, since you're obviously not in the killing business anymore, why don't you just stay nice and quiet while we conduct our business? Unless you want to watch your little friend here learn about the real galaxy." The threat hung in the air like poison gas, and for the first time in his long existence, Keithfer discovered what rage actually felt like. Not the cold, professional satisfaction of a successful hunt. Not the distant amusement of watching prey struggle. This was something hot and immediate and utterly consuming. Someone was threatening Tommy. Someone was pointing a weapon at the small, trusting creature who had shared his food and called him friend, and fell asleep, believing that Keithfer would keep him safe. Keithfer rose to his full height. His scales shifted to their combat configuration. His claws extended to their full lethal length. When he spoke, his voice carried harmonics that made the ship's hull vibrate. "You will not touch the child." The pirate leader's smirk faltered. "Now hold on. I thought you were domesticated." "I am," Keithfer said, taking a step forward that made the deck plates groan under his weight. "But humans, you see, are very territorial about their pack members. And apparently, so am I now." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees as Keithfer's presence filled the space with something that the pirate's primitive hindbrain recognized as death incarnate. Whatever they'd heard about his domestication, whatever rumors had spread about his softness, none of it had prepared them for what happened when someone threatened his human. "Last chance," Keithfer offered, his courtesy as terrifying as his threats had ever been. "Leave this ship now." The pirate leader, to his credit, tried to maintain his bravado. "There's only one of you and 20 of us. Even the great Keithfer can't fight those odds." Keithfer's smile revealed every one of his fangs. "Would you like to test that theory?" What happened next would become legend among both pirates and passengers, though for very different reasons. But from Tommy's perspective, curled safely behind his Fluffy, it just looked like his friend was finally getting to play the space pirate game he'd promised. The battle, if it could be called that, lasted approximately 43 seconds. Keithfer moved with the fluid grace of a creature designed by evolution to be perfect at one thing, ending another creature. But there was something different about his technique this time. Instead of the methodical, artistic killing he was famous for, his movements were precise, efficient, and strangely protective. Every strike was calculated not just to neutralize threats, but to keep those threats as far away from Tommy as possible. The first pirate didn't even have time to fire his weapon before Keithfer's tail sent him flying across the deck to land in a groaning heap against the far wall. The second managed to get off a shot, but Keithfer had already moved. The plasma bolt scorched empty air where he'd been standing a nanosecond before. "Wow!" Tommy's excited voice carried over the sounds of combat. "Look how fast he moves. He's like a ninja dinosaur." The pirate leader, realizing that his tactical assessment had been catastrophically wrong, tried to rally his crew. "Spread out. Surround him. He can't watch all directions at once." This might have been sound strategy against the old Keithfer, who fought for sport and entertainment. But the new Keithfer, the one who had been domesticated by a human child, and now understood the concept of protecting pack members, had a different approach entirely. He didn't try to watch all directions. He simply made sure that every direction led away from Tommy. Pirates flew through the air with the regularity of confetti at a parade. Energy weapons were crushed in massive claws before their wielders could aim properly. The few who managed to land shots found that Keithfer's scales, when properly angled, could deflect plasma bolts back at their sources with devastating accuracy. "Get them! Get them!" the leader screamed. But his crew was rapidly discovering the difference between fighting a predator who was hunting them and fighting one who was protecting something precious. In the middle of the chaos, Tommy stood up and cupped his hands around his mouth. Go, Fluffy. You're doing great. Show them your scary roar. Kiefer, despite being in the middle of dismantling a pirate crew with surgical precision, actually paused to deliver a bone-rattling roar that made the ship's emergency lighting flicker. Tommy clapped enthusiastically, and somehow that sound of appreciation gave Kiefer more satisfaction than 3 centuries of terrified screams ever had. The pirate leader, seeing his crew scattered like leaves in a hurricane, made a desperate play. He grabbed a small explosive device from his belt and held it aloft. Back off, or I blow a hole in this deck. Everyone dies. Kiefer stopped moving, his predator mind instantly calculating blast radius, structural damage, and the probability of Tommy's survival. The math was not encouraging. That's better. The leader panted, blood trickling from a gash on his forehead. Now, here's what's going to happen. You're going to let us take whatever we want, and then you're going to let us leave. Otherwise, this entire section gets vented to space. Tommy, who had been watching this exchange with the focused attention of a child trying to understand adult problems, suddenly stepped out from behind Kiefer. "Excuse me, Mr. Pirate," he said politely. "That's not a real bomb." The leader's eyes narrowed. "What did you say, brat? It's not a real bomb," Tommy repeated with the patient tone of someone explaining something obvious. "My dad's a demolitions engineer. He showed me pictures of all different kinds of explosives so I'd know to stay away from them. That thing you're holding is just a power cell with some wire stuck to it." There was a moment of absolute silence on the deck. Even the emergency klaxons seemed to pause in respect for the profound awkwardness of the situation. The pirate leader looked down at his explosive device, then back at Tommy, then at his assembled crew, who were all staring at him with expressions ranging from disbelief to outright betrayal. The leader staggered. "It's a specialized compact. It's a fake bomb," Tommy announced to everyone present. "He was trying to trick us." The collective groan from the pirate crew was audible even over the ship's ambient noise. Several of them actually face-palmed, which was impressive given that some of them didn't have faces in the traditional sense. Kiefer, who had been preparing for a complex tactical scenario involving explosive decompression and emergency life support, found himself in the considerably simpler situation of dealing with a group of incompetent criminals who had just been exposed by an 8-year-old human. "Well," he said conversationally, "this is embarrassing for everyone involved." The pirate leader, clearly realizing that his career in space piracy had just taken a terminal nosedive, made one last desperate attempt at salvaging the situation. He dropped his fake bomb and lunged directly at Tommy, apparently hoping to use the child as a hostage. This was a mistake of such astronomical proportions that later tactical analysts would use it as an example of how not to assess threats in hostile situations. Kiefer moved faster than physics should have allowed, intercepting the pirate leader's trajectory with one massive claw. The Corfax found himself suspended 3 feet off the ground, staring into glowing red eyes that held absolutely no mercy. "You," Kiefer said in a voice that made the ship's hull plates vibrate, "just threatened my human." "Your human?" the leader squeaked. "My human," Kiefer confirmed. "The small creature who shares his food with me, who called me friend, who trusted me to keep him safe." His claws tightened slightly, not enough to cause permanent damage, but enough to make his point crystal clear. "You attempted to harm something under my protection." The pirate leader's face had gone several shades paler. "Look, I didn't know he was yours. I thought you were just some washed-up has-been who'd lost his edge." "Oh, I haven't lost my edge," Kiefer assured him. "I've simply found something worth using it for." With casual ease, he tossed the pirate leader across the deck to land in a heap with the rest of his defeated crew. The entire group lay there groaning and contemplating their life choices, while Captain Rodriguez and his security team finally arrived, weapons drawn and ready for an action that had already concluded. "Is everyone all right?" Captain Rodriguez called out, surveying the scene of unconscious pirates and structural damage. "We're fine," Tommy announced cheerfully. "Fluffy was amazing. He beat all the bad guys and he didn't hurt anyone too much, and he did his scary roar when I asked him to." Captain Rodriguez looked at Kiefer, who was carefully checking Tommy for injuries, despite the child's obvious health and enthusiasm. "I suppose we should thank you," the captain said carefully. "No thanks necessary," Keithfer replied, satisfied that Tommy hadn't suffered so much as a bruise. "I was protecting my pack." "Your pack?" Captain Rodriguez repeated. Tommy beamed and hugged Keithfer's arm. "I'm his pack and he's my Fluffy. We're family now." As the security team collected the unconscious pirates and damage assessments began, the story spread through the ship's communication systems, and from there to the galactic news networks. Within hours, every major media outlet in 17 star systems was running variations of the same headline. Apex Predator goes soft. Keithfer, the destroyer, becomes ship's guardian after being adopted by a human child. The footage, taken by dozens of passenger recording devices, went viral across multiple species social networks. There was Keithfer allowing Tommy to pet him, Keithfer eating goldfish crackers, Keithfer watching movies in a blanket fort, and finally, Keithfer defending his pack with a ferocity that reminded everyone why he'd been feared in the first place. The commentary was predictably mixed. Some called it the greatest character development arc in galactic history. Others mourned the end of an era of proper predator behavior. A few academic institutions began offering courses in human domestication theory based on the incident. Elder Vashter contacted him again that evening, after the ship had returned to normal operations, and the pirates had been transferred to galactic authorities. "Well," the elder said, his ancient face unreadable, "I suppose congratulations are in order. You've managed to become both completely domesticated and more dangerous than ever. It's quite an achievement." "I prefer the term security consultant," Keithfer replied, with as much dignity as he could muster, while Tommy braided small flowers into his tail spikes. "Security consultant," Elder Vashter repeated thoughtfully. "I like it. Has a nice ring to it. Much better than pet." "I am not a pet," Keithfer said firmly. "Of course not," Elder Vashter agreed. "You're family. There's a difference." After the call ended, Keithfer found himself alone with Tommy on the observation deck, watching stars streak past as the ship continued its journey. The child was drawing pictures of their adventure, complete with stick figures and what appeared to be rainbow-colored explosions. "Are you sad about not being scary anymore?" Tommy asked without looking up from his artwork. Keithfer considered this question seriously. His reputation as the galaxy's most feared predator was certainly damaged beyond repair. The Apex Predator Council would probably reassign him to something embarrassing, like protecting mining colonies or escorting diplomatic vessels. His 300-year career of artistic terror was effectively over. "No," he realized with some surprise. "I'm not sad about it." "Good," Tommy said, adding what might have been a flower, or possibly a small explosion, to his drawing. "Being scary is lonely. Being a friend is better. Is it?" Keithfer asked. Tommy looked up at him with those impossibly blue eyes. Serious for once. "Don't you think so, Fluffy?" Keithfer thought about the warm feeling in his chest when Tommy had called him family. He thought about the satisfaction of protecting instead of destroying, of being trusted instead of feared, of having someone truly happy to see him instead of running away in terror. "Yes," he said quietly, "I think it is." Tommy grinned and went back to his drawing. "I'm going to visit you every vacation," he announced. "Mom and Dad said we can take the same cruise next year. Will you still be here?" Keithfer looked out at the stars, then down at the small human who had somehow reprogrammed 300 years of predatory instincts with nothing more than kindness and goldfish crackers. "Yes," he said, and meant it. "I'll be here." And if there was a waiting list of other cruise ships trying to hire him as a security consultant, and if that waiting list included several luxury liner companies who specifically advertised Apex Predator protection as a selling point, and if he was becoming something of a celebrity in family travel circles, well, that was nobody's business but his own. After all, he was Keithfer the Destroyer, former Apex Predator, current security consultant, Tommy's Fluffy, and he was surprisingly okay with it.